we cannot afford an ANC EFF government. And we think that another 5 years of ANC government will destroy this country. So do we want to save South Africa or not?
Could the DA potentially lead a popular front to unseat the ANC? That's a question that I posed to R.W. Johnson in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. You can watch the full interview with Bill Johnson. That's linked in the description below. Enjoy. But what about the current state of the DA as you see it? Are they going to be equipped adequately to deal with this formidable challenge of attempting to unseat the ANC from power in 24?
Well, they obviously can't do it on their own, which is why I raised the notion of some wider popular front of some sort, because the DA's weakness is, well, I mean, they have several problems, but their main weakness, of course, is they cannot offer an alternative government. And that is what people would like. I think to a large extent, people in South Africa have still got a framework in their mind derived from the older period when, you know, with first past the post and constituencies, you had an alternative government and you had in mind. So if you could either have the UP or you could have the NAT sort of thing. And that was the situation. And the weakness always of the Progressive Party is they couldn't offer an alternative. And the DA are still in that position. So they can only offer, and I think people would like to know what they're getting if they're not going to have the ANC. They want to believe in some viable alternative. Otherwise, you're voting for a sort of vacuum or you're not sure what.
Do you think that's a fair assessment? I mean, they've been in power in the Western Cape, various municipalities as well, coalition governments in most major metros.
They can't offer because you know, even the more optimistic polls are showing them around about 25%. And I'm not saying anything they would dissent from, I'm sure, but that means that everyone knows that you need, you know, 50 and that they're only halfway. So you can't offer a viable alternative. And that is a big problem. And I think that, you know, you've got to realize that in a proportional representation system, that this is normally the situation because PR has the effect of pushing the vote out into, since everybody can get represented, that it maximizes the utility of having a separate and distinct identity right across the spectrum, as it were. So every party tries to go for its own particular grouping. It's unusual in a PR system to get a party with 50.
Yeah, and in preparation for this interview, I was reading your book, South Africa, the First Man, the Last Nation. And in the preface, you say, we have to face the sad truth that South Africa, with the end of apartheid, exchanged one set of authoritarian, hegemonic nationalists for another, and that many of the hopes of liberation have faded as the similarities between these two hegemonies have multiplied. So could this broader popular front, perhaps with the DA at its apex, could that form this a new, more liberal democratic alternative to the historical hegemonic nationalism that we've seen in the past in South Africa?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, it would indeed be a very different sort of alternative. It might include the Freedom Front Plus. In fact, I'm sure it would, but it wouldn't offer, as you say, anything like the old Afrikaner nationalists or the African nationalists. It would be a separate middle ground alliance, and it would have to, as I say, have a minimum program, but you know, it would be a Save South Africa program in effect, saying, look, we've got to re-establish law and order. We've got to stop the gangs taking over this country, which are doing it, the various construction mafias, taxi mafias, etc. And we've got to get economic growth going again. You know, there are certain big things that just have to be done.
Yeah, and I think that one of the big concerns would be, like, do these parties actually have the numbers to do it? And you could have this kind of interregnum where, you know, the ANC is quite low, they could potentially go in with the EFF. Do you think this motley assortment of opposition parties could get the numbers sufficiently high to actually get into power? And, I think we've been talking a lot, my colleagues and I, about the wild dogs thesis. And, it's the ANC, if you consider it to be the big mighty buffalo, if the wild dogs can gang together, they can take down the buffalo. The problem with the wild dogs is that, some of them like to yap at each other, and some of them have rabies. Some of them are not always that keen to cooperate with one another. And Sigmund Freud spoke about the narcissism of small difference. And, if you consider what really divides Action South Africa with the DA, it's not that much, perhaps maybe on immigration, but they actually spend more time harping on at each other rather than the main task of defeating the ANC.
Well, personally, I think that analogies drawn from African wildlife are ridiculous and have, I think, absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. I look at it more as a political scientist. Now, I think that here the imperative is we cannot afford an ANC-EFF government, and we think that another 5 years of ANC government will destroy this country. So do we want to save South Africa or not? And that's a big enough overall objective. And it's saying there's a much worse alternative out there, which has to be avoided. And I think that is the way to look at this. And that would, I hope, and I think it could very realistically increase the vote for that front and its constituent parties.
All right. And what role do you foresee the DA playing in this broader popular front? Do they have what it takes to drive
it would
this
have to
coalition?
play a predominant role. Look, by definition, if you have a contract between these parties saying we will agree a common program, then you're all bound to it equally. And that's very important. So they cease to be the leaders in the sense that they may be the bigger party, but they are just as bound to it as, the UDM or IFP or Mashaba's party, or whatever. And but nonetheless, they would be the largest single bloc within it, and they would quite likely be the biggest gainers in vote terms, because what has tended to happen in Popular Front movements is that the party which takes the initiative in driving the Popular Front tends to be identified with that and to gain the most politically. You can't be sure of that, but it might well work that way. And I think that, it might not. Equally, clearly there are many African voters who don't wish to vote for what they still think of as a white party. So they might say, well, I want to go for that broad front, but I'll vote for Mashaba as a way of doing it. Well, okay, cater for that. Give them the Mashaba option, or UDM or an IFP. It gives you that sort of menu of alternatives.
All right. Well, say they succeed and they take over the keys to the union buildings. What then? Because this capacity of the state has declined so significantly, even over just the last few years, as we've been discussing. Can this breakdown of state capacity be reversed? And what will it take to get South Africa back on the right track, should this Popular Front take power?
Well, it's a good point. I think that, what you would have to do is something analogous to what had to happen in a number of municipalities where the DA took over. You would face a civil service which was full of deployed cadres, and you would have to say to them, listen, we know that you're all there because you're ANC. We won't sack you because of that. We don't care what your private politics are, provided you can and will do the things that we need you to do. But if you either will not, or if you do not have the capacity, then we are going to have to either remove you or to appoint new people who will do the things that you're unable or unwilling to do. And that would lead to a certain shakeout and so on at that level. I think that would be inevitable and you'd have to do it. But I think once you established that, you were in charge and you were jolly well going to force through certain things. And it would be clear. I mean, if you start, how popular some of these things would be. If you could set up a proper police force, which really started to crack down on crime and started putting in jail people who really ought to have been there for some time, that would be extremely popular, as you know. And some of the other things which we're talking about too, getting the water sorted out, really getting going on alternative electricity. I mean, people would cheer for every little bit of improvement you could do. Just stopping the corruption. All of these things are highly popular things politically. So, it's in a sense, but you're right that the state is very weak and you would have to reinforce it, particularly at the top levels, but you would have to, that would take time. That's the problem with it. And you would want to act quickly. So there's a problem there, which you can't really get around. But nonetheless, I think you would be able to make progress steadily.
Thanks for watching. I'm keen to hear from you, our audience. What role do you think the DA could play in pushing for a popular front in South Africa? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, you might want to check out the full-length interview that's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.